What is going on, everyone, and welcome back to the channel for, you guessed it, another Battlefront 2 video. I decided to get back into Battlefront 2 and honestly just do a recap of all the heroes because I realized I had never really done one for specific heroes. I just kind of grouped them all together, said which star cards were the best, and left it at that. But the star cards I haven't really changed my mind on because the game actually hasn't changed since then. They did announce that there would be no more support for the game, which means no more updates and no more changes to the current game. So everything I said in those videos still applies. This, however, is going to be a more in-depth look at each specific character, and I decided to start off with Luke just because who doesn't love playing as Luke? I mean, he's just so fun and easy to use, and it kind of helps that he is Star Wars' poster boy. So without further ado, let's just get right into it. Alright, now like I said before, I already have a video on all the star cards and which ones I think are best to use, but I am going to refer back to this just a couple times throughout this video. The first card is Epicenter, and that one is Repulse, dealing bonus damage when enemies are within half the distance of its radius. So, I mean, in this case it's 40 extra damage, but I personally just never use this card because I think there's so many better cards out there for Luke. The next card, however, is basically just a card that increases Luke's blaster deflection accuracy. So let's say I'm blocking blaster deflections. In the clip above, you'll see it a couple times. It bounces back towards the enemy depending on where that little white dot is on your screen. So you can actually aim blaster deflections back towards an enemy. Now, if you find yourself doing this a lot, it's definitely a card worth using. Again, I don't use it too often because I think there's better cards out there, but that's just my playstyle. And I've talked about playstyle before in other videos. You need to find yours and figure out exactly if you're a defensive, aggressive, team player, all sorts of stuff to help you just determine the best cards for you. Now, there is a drawback for this card, and it's probably the reason that I don't use it ever in any situation. I've never used the card. I have it upgraded, but never used it. It's because A, his blaster deflection is already one of the most accurate in the game. It is crazy accurate. I think the only one that's more accurate without the star card help is Obi-Wan, and that's just because he's like the most defensive character in the game. But on top of that, he will drain much more stamina while blocking blaster shots. So I think Luke has great stamina, and some people may not be bothered by this, but I find it's a lot easier to go on long kill streaks if you have star cards that actually help your stamina and not go against it. This is one of those cards that would go against it because it requires more stamina for the more accurate blaster deflections. Now, this next card, Intensify, is actually a favorite of mine. I will never ever take it off unless I'm doing a heroes versus villains, but when I'm in a regular trooper based game mode, it's always on. Basically, Intensify allows you to become a better Luke the more kills that you get, so you can increase your lightsaber damage by up to 36 points exactly. Yeah, it's 36 extra damage per slice, so you can potentially be one-hitting I guess the assault, the officer, and the specialist class, and you'll do much more damage to the heavies. I mean, there'll still be a 2-hit for the heavies, but you can potentially even 2-hit some of the, I mean, you saw I just 2-hit an agent right there, and that is because I'm on a kill streak with the card Intensify as Luke. So it's just worth it in the trooper-based game modes. Now, in heroes versus villains, where you might be dying a little more frequently, and you're facing bigger and heavier opponents, and you're probably not going on large kill streaks, it may not be worth it in situations like that. Just wanted to take a brief second to also mention that I won't be going over every single star card. I may touch up on a couple here and there, but this is more of like a specifics of the hero or specifics of the villain. But now we're back to a star card that actually gives Luke more melee strikes and a longer blaster deflection time with his stamina. This basically just increases his stamina and allows him to slash more and block more. And I know that doesn't actually sound like the greatest upgrade in the world for a hero, but it actually helps loads in keeping kill streaks going. Now, this next one is Extended Push, and I usually keep it off for the trooper-based game mode, so when there's a lot of, I guess, smaller units running around, such as assault, heavy, officer, aerial, all sorts of stuff, even, I mean, tanks on the battlefield, I'll still keep this card off. I typically save this for maps such as Bespin, Cloud City, Kashyyyk, all sorts of maps where there's like big areas where you can push enemies out of bounds. And heroes versus villains, or even Hero Showdown, is probably my favorite time to use it, just because, I mean, it's kind of cheap, but his push is already pretty good, and it'll push villains pretty far. But if you have this card on, it just increases it so much, it's like crazy not to put it on sometimes. So instead of putting on the kill streak card that gives you more damage, occasionally I'll put this on. That way he can force enemies back and knock them out of the playing area, and most of the time it'll count as a kill towards your team possibly winning that Heroes versus Villains or Hero Showdown. It saved my life a couple times when it was a 2v1 because my teammate went in by themselves and got killed. I was just able to force push one of the enemies off of the map, and then the other one I was able to beat in a duel. But I'd much rather have one enemy go down and then lose to the other than have to fight them both and lose just because I'm fighting two enemies at one time. It just makes it a lot easier to win games. Now again, for a card that I don't use too often, however, it does come in handy in certain situations. Again, Heroes versus Villains is the one where I think it would get used most often, because if you have a larger radius for which you can use your Repulse ability, it is more likely to knock enemies back and possibly off the edge, for example in Kashyyyk or Bespin Cloud City, and then again, knock them out of the playing field. That way your team gets some points that you may not have had before. Now, the last star card I'd like to talk about is Rush Immunity, and that is just because Rush is kind of not an essential star card, or not an essential ability, I guess, but it is something that does help Luke quite a bit get into situations and then get right back out. I mean, I've seen some people use it strictly as an attack method and doing damage to their enemies, and I've also seen other people use it just as a method of faster transportation, getting from point A to point B quicker than if you just ran. Now, I personally don't think it's any faster, but some people seem determined to use it anyway, so I guess let them have that. But the decreased damage that you will take while rushing is pretty darn helpful, especially in a game mode such as Heroes versus Villains. Now, in game modes that involve a lot of troopers, I guess trooper-based game modes you could call them, such as Supremacy and Galactic Assault, anything kind of like that might not be the best card to use, just because I find that most players can't hit you while you're mid-dash anyway, and the few that can, you're not going to get 6 players that can hit you in the same room mid-dash, and they're not all going to hit their shots. Like, even if they can hit you, they're not all going to. It just, even good players miss every now and then. So to me, it's just not really a worthwhile card to put on there unless you are in things such as Heroes versus Villains, where everybody's got a lightsaber or some sort of special ability. Whereas lightsabers, you don't really need good aim. You just need to be able to slash in the general direction. So that's really it for the star cards. But I do want to move on to like a general section of Luke, where I just talk about things that you should keep in mind, and then things that, even if you're not playing as Luke, let's say you always get killed by him, just things that you would need to know to maybe counter someone who's playing as Luke. Alright, so first and foremost, what kind of player is Luke? Luke is a very aggressive, yet also defensive at the same time player. He's a very good hero, I guess, to start using if you're new to the game, or even if you're a long-time player. He's just easy to use. It's not hard to get good at using him, but there are little quirks and gimmicks of getting around dying by him. Like if you're a stormtrooper and you see a Luke dashing towards you, I mean, A, just avoid him. I mean, don't try and get into conflict with him. But B, the roll button is key. Rolling while they're trying to slash their saber at you, 9 times out of 10 will avoid the saber slash, and you will not take any damage. Also, he has then just used some of his stamina to attack you, and he wasn't able to strike you down. So you then bought yourself a few more seconds. What I usually do is I wait to see if they look like they're going to strike again. I will then roll again, and then try and distance myself to said player. If they don't look like they're going to strike again, and they look a little confused as to where you went, because you did roll, if they're close to you, they could lose sight of you very easily. So if they have lost sight of you and they're trying to find you, I'd say distance yourself just a little bit, try and put some lasers into them, and then once they get close, roll again, try and see if you can confuse them one more time. Now, I'm going to tell you, it is pretty difficult to kill a hero without being a hero or some sort of special troop that has more hit points. I think it's easiest to kill a hero if you're heavy, just because of how good the blaster is, and you also have an extra 50 points. So even if Luke has his star card where he becomes just basically a superhero, where he can 1/slash assault, officer, and specialist, for heavies he will still have to 2-hit. It doesn't matter if he's maxed out on his damage per lightsaber swing. So that's just something to keep in mind if you're playing against him. Another thing is he has a ton of stamina and it regenerates fast. So if you're shooting at him and you see his stamina start to get low and then you see him start to run away, follow him and try and just unload. That's one of the few times I'll recommend actually going towards and engaging Luke in a fight, because it shows you his health bar and it shows you his stamina all right above him, which is a really nice thing that I guess DICE technically put it in the game, but DICE did to make it more interactive and I guess more strategic too. You can see an opponent's health and you can see their stamina, which allows you to react better and make better plays while playing the game. So if you do see his stamina low, I definitely recommend going after him, because it's just a pain to avoid the fight and then let that stamina regenerate. Although it does regenerate very fast. Now, tips if you're playing Luke. As I've been saying, he is an aggressive player, but he can also be defensive if need be. All three of his abilities are aggressive and I guess defensive. Saber Rush, you do, I guess, gain some damage reduction. So if someone's shooting you as you're rushing, you won't take as much damage if you get hit. Whereas if you were just running at them, you might take a little bit more damage. Now with All Out Push, you need to start just thinking in your mind about if you're near an edge, maybe now's a good time to use All Out Push. If you're in a room with a lot of people shooting at you, you might want to use Repulse. You just kind of have to feel out the situation. I recommend getting into just like a little game of Onslaught, like you see me in right now, and practicing with said hero or villain before you go take them into an actual game. Now, if you're looking to just level up heroes, one thing I recommend is playing in co-op. There are only 4 other players with you, and all 4 of you can play as a hero or a villain. Now, obviously, you can't all have the same hero or villain, but it makes your chances a lot higher of getting the villain or hero that you want to play with and being able to level them up. It's also a lot easier to kill AI, which is why I like Supremacy, because it's a mixture of AI and players. So there's really not a whole lot of tips and tricks for Luke. I mean, you really just kind of have to feel him out, realize that dashing is going to be your best friend as far as avoiding hits and movement, and then you're going to want to use his lightsaber more than you want to use his abilities. I guess All Out Push is, well, not All Out Push, just regular Force Push is probably his best ability, and then maybe Saber Rush would be second. But I quite honestly like them all, and I get away with using them all no problem. Anyways, I hope y'all enjoyed. If you did, don't forget to smack that like button, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace.